We have a saying in English that if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And that saying was circling around inside my mind last week when less than 24 hours after the Japanese general election, rumors started swirling around that immigration restrictions were going to be eased starting today, November 8th, 2021. Now, of course, as we all know, I was founded in being skeptical, right? So although it seemed like it might have been like what happened last October, where the doors were basically just flung open to anyone with a medium or long stay visa, it quickly became clear that this was going to be a much more cumbersome process. So as I'm sure most of you watching this know, there are many moving parts to this, but there are 2 points of contention. Number one, that your time frame for entering Japan is based on when your COE was issued. Basically, if you have a COE issued up until April of 2020, you have the possibility to enter this month in November. If your COE was issued between April and October of 2020, you have the possibility to enter in December. And if your COE was issued between October 2020 and April of 2021, you have the possibility to enter in January. Everyone else is at the back of the queue behind that. That's the first bit. The second bit is that in order to be able to apply for the visa, the organization that's going to be sponsoring you, so your company if you're working, your school if you're going to be studying, needs to obtain a special certification or permission or something, I guess from the Ministry of Land, Health and Welfare, or maybe the Immigration Services Agency. It's very confusing. And unfortunately, although there was some kind of a video conference today where Davide from Gogo Nihon was going to ask some questions to the relevant authorities, it seemed that that did not exactly go as planned. So we really don't have any clarity. So the bad news is that as of right now, the vast majority of people, even those with COEs, are not going to be able to get their visas and enter Japan probably before the end of this year. So rather than rehash that and lament it, as lamentable as the status quo is right now with the Japan travel ban, I wanted to talk about 2 things. I want to first talk about where I think this is all going and how I think it's all going to resolve. And number 2, the action steps we can take on the way. So as we sort of look at where we are right now, which is basically that short-term business travelers can now enter Japan and quarantine for only 3 days, and that sometime between now and the end of January 2022, students and workers are theoretically going to be able to enter. I think back to the middle of October, when a previously unknown to me website, kanpai.fr, posted a rumor. So the rumor was actually twofold. So the first part of the rumor was that business travelers were going to be allowed in November, shortly after the election. Students and workers would be allowed before the end of the year. That was the first part. But then the second part was that tourists were going to be allowed from mid-January on the condition that they had a PCR test, a negative PCR test, and a vaccination certificate, that they came from green countries, so heavily vaccinated countries, so the US, EU, Australia, New Zealand, so on and so forth. And that they may have to quarantine for up to 3 days. Now, at the time, a lot of people were skeptical about this because, of course, nobody who's not a French speaker knew this website. They had no corroboration for this other than saying they had a source within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. However, as we see, the first part of their rumor ended up proving true. And because of that, I am led to believe that the second part might be true as well. Another thing that makes me feel this way, 2 other things, are that number 1, immediately after the relaxation was announced in the wake of the election, Keidanren, which of course has been pushing for relaxation for months now, came out very strongly and said, this is good, but you got to do better. We want a full relaxation of quarantine for everyone entering Japan. And then even more specifically than that, Mori Masako, who is a member of the House of Councilors from Fukushima-ken, who chairs the Vaccine Passport Committee in the House of Councilors, came out and basically said the same thing. She said, you know, this was exactly what I proposed to the government. They're enacting it exactly as I proposed it. our next step is to eliminate the quarantine entirely and restart tourism, which of course is very important to her being from Tohoku, because since Tohoku is not really that popular among Japanese domestic travelers, that region's tourism industry doesn't really have any hope if foreign tourists can't return. Now, I realize that on this channel, even though I'm a very tourism-minded person because I have a tourism business in Japan, we talk a lot about love is not tourism and education is not tourism. But I think this is important because provided that the Japanese government does not renege on the promises they've just made to students, and we're going to talk about that in a second and how you can try to make sure that doesn't happen, you would think that if they're going to start accepting tourists, even with a small quarantine and other little caveats by the middle of January, that they are going to have a well-oiled system in place for accepting students by that time. So I would say, first is that even though it is unfortunate that you guys are going to have to continue waiting, I think that, again, except in the event that Japan totally closes the border again, which, as we know, based on what happened late last year, is not totally impossible. But I think unless something like that happens, you are going to get in within the next couple of months. So that's the good news. Now, what about action steps? So there are a lot of things I think we can do. But I think the first thing we need to do is those of you who are still in this very polite and deferential and subservient mindset, you need to get out of it. I understand that Japan is a really respectful and deferential culture. I understand that gaijin don't have a lot of power and respect within that culture. But here's the thing. The definition of insanity, as I've said in other videos, is doing the same thing and expecting different results, right? So far, being obedient and respectful and waiting patiently has not really gotten us anywhere, okay? So I think the first thing that we have to do in all of our interactions online, over the phone, via email, with Japanese officials and journalists and anybody connected to this needs to be that we speak more forcefully, not necessarily in a demanding or rude way, but speak more forcefully and speak more clearly about what it is that we expect. So for example, I'm going to talk about the media first, both the fake news media, which is both Japanese and foreign, as well as sort of the, I guess I would say the useful idiots of the media. So who am I talking about? A great example of this would be, there was this reporter for the Asahi Shimbun, their New York reporter, I don't remember his name, but last month a lot of students sort of became endeared toward this man because he had posted affirmatively about the Japan travel ban. He had requested a lot of people to send in their stories, and then I guess once he collated some of those stories, he was like, wow, I'm so shocked about the situation that's happening, and I can't believe that so many people are locked out. Now again, a lot of people, good faith, nice people, nicer than me, they were very endeared by this and they were very happy and they felt very flattered that someone who was potentially in a position of influence was suddenly aware of their situation. Not me. Because here's the thing, if you're a journalist and you are just now realizing almost 2 years into your country's borders being totally closed, that there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people whose lives have been affected and ruined by this ban, not only are you not a good journalist, but I mean, have you been living under a rock for the past 2 years? Anybody with half a brain could realize that this was a serious and existential situation, and not something to be shocked about when you figure it out. So I think that whether it's people like this, whether it's headlines like in Nikkei, Nikkei Asian, they've been releasing headlines the past week. Japan about to open borders. Japan's borders open on Monday. Japan reopens to the world. Every time you see that online, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, wherever you see it, you need to push back. You need to say, no, Japan's border is not open and here's why. You need to say, no, the hashtag Japan travel ban, use these hashtags, is still in place. Here's why. A third way that I think we really need to push back on the media is these sort of useful idiot gaijin journalists. Now, I'm not going to name these people by name because some of them have been very good to me in the past and they've been very good to our community. But a lot of these people, because I think they are blinded by the privilege of them already being in Japan and this not really being important to them, they sort of I think they don't have any sense of urgency in reporting the true facts of this situation. There was one guy who, I guess on Friday, he posted this GIF of people clapping, and basically the same Nikkei headline that, yay, Japan is finally reopening to foreigners. Didn't do any digging, didn't do any due diligence, didn't do any follow-up, no scrutiny, no examination. And it's just really shambolic, because I don't think this person is a bad person and has bad intentions, but at the same time, the fact that he is in Japan, probably speaks pretty good Japanese, probably could get into a Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Ministry of Land, Health, and Welfare press conference and actually ask a question, but is choosing just to believe the easy hype and to propagate this false message across the internet, it's actually hurting our cause and not helping it. So when you see shit like that, you also have an obligation to call it out. Now, on a more proactive note, there are some journalists who are really genuinely on our side and who really genuinely are going to be thorns in the side of the Japanese government. Like Karen Nishimura, she is somebody who I think, for example, I talked earlier about the fact that we need to try to get a commitment from the Japanese government that come hell or high water, come sixth wave, because the sixth wave is going to come and the seventh wave is going to come, the eighth wave is going to come. This virus is going to keep circulating at certain levels for the rest of our lifetimes, regardless of what the border measures are. We need to get a commitment from the Japanese government. We need to get them to go on record to say that, no, we are not going to close the border again. You know, we might make it to where only vaccinated people can come in. We might say that you have to have 2 or 3 tests instead of 1. We might tighten the restrictions, but we are not going to pull up the drawbridge again. We're not going to close the door again. We need to get them to commit to that. And a great way to do this would be to petition somebody like Karen Nishimura to go to the next press conference and get a Japanese government official to say that on record. That would be huge for us. You know, another person I think who has been really good throughout this, even though I think she's not the same sort of journalist as Karen Nishimura, is Rochelle Culp. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but she's been really excellent. And she was someone who this June actually shed light on the fact that because of the Japanese decision-making process, they very likely have a plan in place behind closed doors and they just haven't implemented it yet, which is another reason I am inclined to believe the rumors from Kanpai.fr. Another thing that is really helpful, or that would be really helpful going forward rather in terms of action steps, is when you speak to officials, be these embassy staff, be these staff at your university or your company, or anybody else who's in any sort of position of influence, be honest about the way this is impacting you. Be honest about your expectations. Be honest about the way this makes you feel. For example, if you call the embassy in your country to ask if you can submit your COE and get your visa, and they tell you that you can't get it yet because of XYZ reason, tell them how this makes you feel. Tell them how this is affecting your mental health. Tell them that this is not in line with what you signed up for when you decided that you were going to study or work in Japan and devote your time and your money and your energy to helping move Japan forward in the world. You know, ask them if there's an email where you can write an official letter of complaint or grievance. Find the email if they don't give it to you and put it in writing. You know, there was this suggestion in one of the threads that Davide started that somehow members of his Discord were being problematic by writing complaint letters and emails to embassy staff around the world. But I totally disagree with that. The way democracy works is making noise, making your voice heard. And last time I checked, Japan is still a democracy, even for people who are not citizens of the country. The only way the message is going to go up the totem pole to where it needs to get is if people at the bottom of the totem pole hear what people are feeling, they share that message, and we all do our part. So I think, again, you don't need to be disrespectful. You don't need to be an asshole. You don't even need to be as rough around the edges as I am, but you do need to make your voice heard. And you do need to be honest about how you feel. And we all need to do our part in this. And I think beyond that, unfortunately, at this point, it just remains a waiting game. I think the 2 gray areas are as follows. Number 1, when the 6th wave comes, because it is going to come, it's not a question of if, but when, is Japan going to totally close the border again? And number 2, what are the next steps in relaxation going to be? And I guess on that note, there's another thing I would like to say. And I don't mean any insult by this, because look, I get it. A lot of you are desperate, and I don't say this in a way to attack you, because I was in the same place a year ago, but you are willing to do anything it takes to go to Japan. You would eat a piece of shit out of a toilet if they told you it would get you into Japan. I totally get that. I understand desperation. I've been there myself. But here's the thing. It's sort of like when you're dating someone who disrespects you, and in order to try to get them to respect you, you change your schedule and you cancel your plans and you do whatever it takes to spend more time with them. And in actuality, by debasing yourself and disrespecting yourself like that, you are giving them more license to treat you badly, and you are decreasing the chances that you're ever going to be in a meaningful relationship with that person. Well, it's the same thing with Japan. I hear a lot of you saying, you know, I'll take 1 test, 2 tests, 3 tests, I'll get triple vaxxed, I'll quarantine for a month if necessary. And I understand the logic of you saying this, but in fact, it is the continuation of Japan's testing and quarantine regime at all, which by the way is unique within the G7. Most G7 countries, you take a test before you depart, you show your vaccination certificate, bada bing, bada boom, you are in quarantine free, no questions asked. It is the continuation of this complicated and bureaucratic system in the first place that keeps everyone, students, workers, people in relationships, and tourists out. So I think that, that you need to stop begging for scraps and start demanding your filet mignon that you're entitled to. The second thing, going back to the inevitable 6th wave, you need to stop focusing on the fact that Japan currently has almost 0 cases and pretending like this is a good thing. Because in reality, the fewer cases Japan has and the longer it stays at that low number, the less likely it is that further relaxations are going to take place. The Japanese people already believe that it is primarily because of foreigners coming into the country that their cases are going up. So if their cases stay low and it looks like they can achieve the COVID-0 dream, that even Australia and New Zealand and everywhere in the world besides China have conceded is never going to happen, it's going to make it less likely that you can enter Japan in the future, not more. So I'm going to end it there for now because I don't want this to be another 25-minute video. But I hope that by the time December comes along, we have some more clarification and reassurances that some of you will be in Japan and that all of you will feel confident that you will soon be on your way. Okay? Bye.